Good day and welcome to our viewers from across the region and internationally. I am Tahira Carter, your host for the next 2 days of thought-provoking presentations and transformational discussions as we chart the future of education in the OECS. Before we get into today's proceedings, allow me to acknowledge some of our specially invited guests, members of cabinet, ambassadors, permanent secretaries, chiefs of education across the region, directors, other invitees, staff of the various ministries, and staff of the OECS Commission. Welcome, everyone. This forum is the third in a series of education-centered meetings organized by the OECS Commission over the course of this year to address learning in all its forms, including what we have learned about learning over the past 2 years. We've sought the expertise of regional and international stalwarts in education, in addition to the invaluable input of regional ministries of education, teachers, students, and parents, to determine the radical changes required now to break down barriers to student success. These months of consultations and engagements reach a high point today in this highly anticipated forum under the theme OECS Education Towards a Learning Crescendo. The idea of the crescendo conveys the understanding that we are in the build-up, having made some significant strides, but acknowledging that much more is needed to achieve the optimal standard of performance in our education system. We're so excited to have your participation and support today. On the program for day one, we have welcome addresses by the Director General of the OECS, His Excellency Dr. Didicus Jules, and Chair of the OECS Council of Ministers for Education, the Honorable Sean Edward. The keynote address today will be delivered by Dr. Linda Darling Hammond, and key members of staff of the OECS Education Development Management Unit and the Open Development Education teams will also present on OECS's vision for education. Today's sessions have been designed to allow for questions and interactions with you, our audience. We encourage you to engage our moderators and ask questions. You can also pose questions by clicking on the Q&A section that you will find to the bottom of your screen. Post your comments in the chat and let us know what you think of the discussions. We also want to know where you're tuning in from, so drop your flags in the chat as well. Finally, to our Francophone brothers and sisters, these sessions will be live translated into French. So simply click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and you can access this service. Without further ado, I welcome the Director General of the OECS, His Excellency Dr. Didicus Jules, and the Minister for Education, St. Lucia, and the current Chair of the OECS Council of Ministers for Education, Honorable Sean Edward, to deliver opening remarks.
Chair of the OECS Council of Ministers of Education, the Honorable Sean W. Edwards, Minister of Education, Sustainable Development, Innovation, Science, Technology, and Vocational Training of St. Lucia, Honorable Ministers of Education of the OECS, esteemed guest speaker Dr. Linda Darling Hammond, permanent secretaries and chief education officers, parents, teachers, students, development partners, Dr. Carlin Radix, Head of Social Development Division, Mrs. Sisra Simon and colleagues of the Education Development Management Unit, greetings and welcome to all from the OECS Commission. Reshaping education is no longer a desire or a luxury. It is now a requirement for survival of the system and the salvation of the many who will be lost if we do not act now. The OECS region is bound by more than the revised Treaty of Basse-Terre. We are bound in a bond of circumstance and the will to succeed beyond our size and the associated expectations. We believe in our mandate to work together to leverage the power of the collective. Our challenges and vulnerabilities do not constrain us. There is much that we can do, particularly if we continue to work together, strengthen our joint structures, efforts, and resources, and channel these to deal with barriers to education while keeping the focus on learning. The challenge of learning is not limited to students. It is an imperative increasingly foisted on us by the evolution of human civilization, by the advance of technology as we stand on the cusp of the fifth industrial revolution, and most importantly, by the demands of survival in a world of volatility, uncertainty, and our own condition of vulnerability as small island developing states. The challenge of learning is therefore a whole of society obligation. It is about more than the student. It encompasses all those upon whom the students depend, who themselves must keep learning so that students become lifelong learners themselves. Parents, family members, the community, teachers, principals, other education officials must all keep learning to meet the needs of learners and create the environment for them to flourish. They need to be protected, challenged, supported, guided, and celebrated as learners in every way and consistently. That is the education system that we want. One that is squarely focused on learning of all and for all. The choice of theme for this education forum, OECS Education Towards a Learning Crescendo, is a clear demonstration of the will of the OECS to pursue ultimate learning goals and to do so to the highest degree possible for us. It is a commitment to necessary reconfigurations to achieve the levels of learning in children and young adults that become the true manifestation of the strength and quality of education in the OECS. These results stand out most profoundly when we can achieve that in children who come from different circumstances, those who are in the category of the vulnerable, and those who are deemed at risk due to circumstance. That is why I beam with pride knowing that tomorrow our featured speaker is a student, a young person from one of our islands, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a young person with a powerful story to tell. Stay tuned for that presentation tomorrow when young Marika Baptiste joins us. I am equally elated to note the involvement of young people in this forum. Not only are students featured throughout, but they've been deeply involved at every step in the development of the OECS Declaration on Education, which will be highlighted during this forum. Welcome to our Education Forum 2021 that will herald the learning crescendo.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jules. The challenge of learning is a whole of society endeavor. This is what stood out most to me in your presentation, and that we all have a part to play. Certainly true, and definitely a perspective, an important perspective of the approach as we go into today's discussions. We now invite the Honorable Minister Edward to deliver opening remarks.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought into sharp focus the vulnerability, complexity, and fragility of our education
Donc, la
system.
pandémie de Covid-19
It also showcased
a mis en
our
évidence la
resilience and our
vulnérabilité, la
resourcefulness as
complexité et
small
la
island
fragilité de nos
states.
systèmes éducatifs.
One of the most
Elle a
celebrated
également mis
minds
en
of the
évidence
20th
notre
century,
résilience et
Professor
notre
Albert
ingéniosité
Einstein,
en tant que
once
petits
opined
États insulaires.
that in the midst of every
L'un des
crisis
esprits les plus
lies great
célèbres du
opportunity.
XXe siècle, le
This certainly
professeur
rings true
Albert
for our
Einstein,
COVID-19 impacted education
a dit
system.
qu'au centre de la difficulté se
This
trouve
health crisis
l'opportunité.
has presented us with a golden opportunity to more than just restructure instructional delivery. As ministers of education, we are well placed to reimagine and reshape our education landscape. The question can therefore be asked, will we summon the courage to embrace this opportunity and create a badly needed education revolution in the current environment? It is clear that this crisis has created a fissure in our traditional educational system, and from this crack, we saw small innovations take root. This chink presents an opportunity for even greater transformation. In pondering on the future of education post-COVID, I chose to focus on three key areas, the first being instruction and learning. We must do away with the notion that the normalcy or staple in instruction and learning is of teachers standing before a class of students. This concept, as the sole image of instruction, is a thing of the past, not to be done away with in its entirety, but to exist alongside the integration of technology into education. The COVID-19 experience, which had governments around the region investing millions in infrastructure required to support virtual learning and the commensurate returns on this investment, means that technology in education is here to stay. Of course, face-to-face instruction is still critical, especially at some key developmental stages and for particular subjects. But face-to-face does not have to be the usual approach. It means that our educators of the future will need to adapt and innovate. The future of education will be one that embraces technology. The classroom as we know it will not be limited to just four walls, but will also include a range of platforms, hardware, and software. Learning materials will be more than just textbooks, but will incorporate many forms of digital media. Our teachers will become content developers rather than just the users of content, and our students will become co-creators of their own learning. This brings me to my second point of focus: curriculum development. We often lament the fact that many of our citizens lack critical thinking skills and other skills necessary for functioning in this global environment. But what exactly are we teaching? How are we teaching? The curriculum which supports the future of education should be one that is developmental and supports both synchronous and asynchronous learning. Baba et al. Posited that while helping students develop basic practical skills is still needed, education should also be about the development of humanity in citizens of local and global societies. Education must be seen as a pathway to attaining lifelong learning, satisfaction, happiness, well-being, opportunity, and contribution to humanity. Our curriculum must therefore respond to these needs. Also, it must focus on developing the skills of critical thinking, adaptability, problem solving, and decision making, skills that augur well for success. Importantly, our curriculum should facilitate our students in pursuing their passions and utilizing their talents. There has been much discussion on the future-focused curriculum, one that promotes the concentration on future-focused issues such as sustainability, enterprise, and civics. It also embraces factors critical to economic growth within a local context. For example, we speak to the need for the enhancement of technical and vocational skills within our education system, as this is seen as a contributor to economic development. Our curriculum should therefore reflect this. Our curriculum should be seen as a roadmap, a compass even, that points in the direction of where we long to be in the future. Finally, human capacity. I consider human capacity as the next critical area of focus as we design the education system of the future. In my preamble, I touched on resilience as presenting an opportunity. We observed how our school administrators and teachers responded, adapted, and innovated during the pandemic. Education continued, and there are many commendable initiatives that, had it not been for the pandemic, would probably never have surfaced. Our teachers, many with limited preparation, digital skills, or knowledge, continued the business of education. The actions demonstrated that in the Caribbean, we have a large population of administrators and teachers who are willing to learn how to do things differently, and we should capitalize on that. The future of education is hinged on collaborations, interactions, and relations amongst administrators, teachers, parents, and students. As these relationships grow, the teacher's role is expanding, and they should be prepared to collect data, develop and share content, become active researchers and analysts. It means, therefore, that we need to strengthen our human resource capacity through capacity building initiatives and training. Only then will the investment made in technology and curriculum development deliver the return expected. A return that is manifested through the graduation of responsible citizens, capable, willing, and ready to function in any global setting that they choose. In closing, let me re-emphasize that the renewal of education rests heavily on the three areas mentioned. Education will always be about teaching and learning. It will be about curriculum, and it will revolve around the capacity of our human resources. However, we envision in the post-COVID-19 education era, close attention must be paid to the foregoing. To not do so and not effect the changes that we should would mean that we as ministers would have failed to take advantage of this COVID-19 induced crack, which allowed for the emergence of innovation in education. It would be a gross dereliction of duty if the opportunities before us are not seized. This is our opportunity to promote even greater innovations towards the transformation of the education landscape. The OECS Commission has provided a solid platform upon which we can build individually and as a collective. Their programs and interventions are diverse and relevant, but more importantly, they reflect the realities of member states within the sub-region. I am very optimistic about the future of education in the OECS and the wider Caribbean.
Thank you so much, Minister. That was the Honorable Sean Edward, Minister of Education for St. Lucia. Will we accept the challenge to create education and educational revolution in the region? The choice is definitely ours, and we will have an opportunity over these next 2 days to definitely contribute to this process. We will now hear from the Program Director of the OECS Educational Development Management Unit, Mrs. Cicera Simon, who will speak to the OECS vision. How do we reach a learning crescendo? Mrs. Simon?
Welcome, a pleasant good morning to everyone. Allow me to adopt the protocols already established. I am Cicera Simon, Program Director, Education at the Education Development Management Unit at the OECS Commission. We all know how easy it is to tear a single sheet of paper. However, the more sheets that are added to one, the more difficult it is to tear these sheets. This idea of collective strength is one that is common to the OECS. Individually, the member states may be as vulnerable as a sheet of paper, but together they are bound and not so easily torn. The principle of power in togetherness undergirds the joint efforts of OECS countries within the Economic Union. OECS member states and the Commission are charged with an important mandate, and that is to accelerate the development of education for the ultimate benefit of the people in the region. In fulfilling this mandate, we have been charged with the responsibility of implementing the Regional Framework for Education Development, the OECS Education Sector Strategy 2012 to 2021. Therefore, this strategy really belongs to the people of the OECS. The Regional Education Program is built through and executed in a collaborative manner among member states and the OECS Commission, in keeping with the spirit of the revised Treaty of Basel, and specifically as it relates to the protocols on education, Article 23 of the revised Treaty of Basel. That treaty facilitates free movement of students, teachers, principals, education officers through common experiences in teaching, policy, common curricula, and assessment standards. So how is it that we do this? Together with ministers of education, permanent secretaries, chief education officers, directors of education, education officers, principals, teachers, across ministries of education, we consider collectively how we can make progress to deliver quality instruction, help to shape the kind of education system that meets every individual need and in turn the needs of our fledgling economic union. OECS education towards a learning crescendo. Inherent in this theme, which has framed many of our engagements this year, is the same concept of togetherness. Whether you think of a crescendo as a wave or a musical piece, unified action is required to reach that peak or climax. Alone, we are one drop, but together, we are an ocean. Take a look at how we've been engaging.
The OECS Education Development Management Unit, together through a highly skilled and qualified technical team, develop programs and help strengthen the education systems of the OECS. Together with partner units within the OECS Commission, Health, Social, Environmental, create synergies and broaden perspectives. Together with ministries of education across the OECS, promote one region for all citizens with strategic teams that leverage the power of the collective, tackle common challenges, improve efficiencies, and learn from each other. With education development partners, secure funding and strengthen interventions. Together for the people of the OECS region, OECS Education. We do it together so that every learner succeeds.
In the face of the challenges impacting education, particularly in recent times, it is reassuring to know that the spirit of togetherness and the commitment to unified efforts are alive. There is still much to do, but it starts with the will of the people. Many powerful initiatives in education have commenced in shaping a new future for OECS education, such as the Program for Educational Advancement and Relevant Learning, funded by the Global Partnership for Education, and the Augmented Virtual Reality Initiative funded by the World Bank Group. The collective will, power, effort, and resources that we have been reiterating will be the catalyst to take us to the future we want to see. We hope you too will see value in this. Let us take a quick look at what we have been doing.
OECS approach most recently with COVID-19 has been one of the great examples of a regional benefit of a centralized approach. Ministries of education have worked collaboratively on teacher training, educational interventions, psychosocial support, and ways to respond to the pandemic across the region. This is a great example of why a regional and collaborative approach is most effective.
Then I have gotten to the point where I've been able to assist Montserrat and also the Virgin Islands in their administrative data systems. So we were then guided to learn that our information was not supposed to be produced for the OECS. Rather, it is being produced for home consumption within the Ministry of Education and then shared with the OECS.
It's in coming together and connecting that we realize how much we have in common, and working together we will be able to find the solutions. And of course, doing so will maximize resources and cost us a lot less time and money.
So what is on our horizon? We are diligently pursuing the development of a digital curriculum with supporting digital instructional content, school mapping, and connectivity, and at the same time strengthening our data systems. We hope that you share our enthusiasm for the future, addressing some of the gaps that have been outstanding for so long due to perceived inaction. Rally with us as one collective, one force, one mind, and one OECS to reach the learning crescendo that we desire. Over the next 2 days, we hope to inspire you to engender introspection and create an enabling environment to rethink, to shape, and revitalize OECS education. In that way, we expect to sharpen the lens on the learner and truthfully realize the goal of our OECS education sector strategy. Every learner succeeds. We encourage you to take in the entire program scheduled for today and tomorrow, and we promise you stimulating professional discourse, thought-provoking conversations that will translate into actions that we will pursue. The OECS Declaration on Education, a critical outcome of this forum, is expected to help represent the various perspectives and elaborations of issues raised before and during this two-day education forum. Thanks for being part of this mold-breaking series of engagements. Do enjoy the rest of the program, and let us all move towards that learning crescendo. I thank you.
The power of the collective. It is only together that we are able to achieve the future that we desire. Thank you, Mrs. Simon. We will now listen to a short message in support of education out of the mouth of a babe. This video is the OECS Commission's contribution to the Raise Your Hand initiative by the Global Partnership for Education.
I am a child. I love life. I am unique. I am special. I raise my hand to learn. Do you see me? Do you see my hand? Show me your hand. Raise your hand so that I can learn. I raise my hand to share my ideas. You raise your hand to shape them. I raise my hands with questions, you raise your hands with answers. I raise my hand for help, you raise your hand to help. I raise my hand for funding, you raise your hand in support. Raise your hand for education.
This presentation is brought to you by the OECS Commission in support of the Global Partnership for Education Raise Your Hand initiative.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my absolute honor to present to you our keynote speaker for today, Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond. Our moderator for this session is Mr. Kamali Mannix, current chair of the OECS Youth Advisory Network and teacher based in Antigua and Barbuda. To provide a formal introduction to our speaker, I now call on Ms. Tyler Dasherville of the OECS Education Development Management Unit.
I am so pleased to be here with my education colleagues from the Eastern Caribbean states. This is an important time for OECS countries like others in the world seeking to respond to the economic and environmental shocks that we've all experienced. And these are shocks to which small countries are so vulnerable. The union that has been formed in the OECS holds powerful potential for knowledge sharing, for joint research, for collaborative actions to advance education. Considering what OECS has already achieved with the relative strength and value of your currency, imagine what may be possible when you join forces around education. I'm really glad to have this opportunity to contribute to this moment of a growing crescendo in your efforts of education. And I'm going to talk a little today about building back better. As we recover for learning, this is a conversation, as I said, all over the world. And I'm going to root that in how the science of learning and development can help us reinvent education for the century that we're in. All around the world, we've faced a public health crisis, an economic crisis, a climate crisis, and in many places, a civil rights crisis, which is really the manifestation of long-standing inequalities in our education systems and in our societies as a whole. And these moments, which come periodically in history, often lead to generational social changes of great magnitude. And I think this is such a moment. And a question we have is, how can we use this time to support systemic change? At the Learning Policy Institute, we developed a paper and a set of examples and vignettes and other tools for restarting and reinventing school, both in the time of COVID and beyond. And all of these are on our website, and I'm going to share these slides with you, and the links are readily available if you want to use them. But the question is, why should we think about reinventing? And for most of us all over the world, our current schools were designed in the early 1900s. They were not designed to support relationships. They were not designed for a whole child approach for the 21st century deeper learning skills of critical thinking and problem solving that we so need today, for the personalized supports that we know are so important for learning, or for equitable opportunity or achievement for everyone in the school community. When we think about reinventing school, we think about it as focusing on authentic learning and equity, and harnessing the knowledge of human development, learning, and effective teaching that was accumulated over the last century and needed for the next. And there's been a process in the United States of trying to synthesize all of the learning from neuroscience, cognitive science, learning science, developmental science, and really understand what does it tell us about how people learn and develop and how we can organize schools to support that. A set of papers that were published in the Applied Developmental Science Journal that synthesized the science were followed by a paper that my team took responsibility for on what are the implications for practice of that science. And that particular paper has had over 700,000 downloads around the world. So it's obviously a deep topic of interest for so many educators who want to really build schools so that they support the way children will actually learn. Similarly, there was a National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development that put out this report and a set of research papers on the evidence base for how we learn, the brain basis for integrating social, emotional, and academic development. And I'm going to tell you a little about what those studies find. If you look across this vast quantity of research, there's certain principles that emerge. The first thing is that the brain is always developing throughout life, even at my age, as a product of relationships and experiences. Your brain does not like baked and done when you are born, but relationships are the essential ingredient that catalyzes healthy learning and development. Supportive environments reduce anxiety, which clouds the brain and makes it function less well and actually changes the architecture of the brain. And they also enhance trust, and those turn out to be extremely important for learning because learning is social, emotional, and academic. Emotion and learning are completely connected. If I feel good about an environment, if I feel good about the teacher, about my peers, if I feel a sense of trust, if I'm not anxious, if I'm not traumatized or stigmatized by others, then I'm going to learn much more effectively. So when we think about academic learning, social and emotional learning is not a distraction from academics. It's actually the pathway to academic success. We've seen in a summary of 200 plus studies about social and emotional learning programs that they not only made students feel more attached to school and better behaved and better environment, but also increased academic achievement by on average about 11 percentile points. And that's a very large differential. Children actively construct knowledge by connecting what they know to what they are learning. And they do that in their cultural contexts. All learning is about connections. It's about the neurons connecting in the brain, the neurons that fire together, wire together. And they produce more capacity for learning, more intelligence. And it also happens as we are learning that we need to connect what we already know to what we are learning. That always happens in cultural context, which is why culturally responsive teaching and pedagogies are so important for the fundamental act of learning. Students' perceptions of their own ability influence learning. If I have come to believe that I am not good at math, if I've come to believe that I am a good reader, those things actually transform the way I approach math and reading and how much I ultimately learn. And finally, trauma and adversity affect learning. And many, many children have been extremely traumatized in the pandemic, but even before that, and certainly will be since, because we don't always have an environment that is supportive of all of children's needs. And trauma impacts the way the brain operates. It affects learning. Schools have to be alert to not punishing children when they manifest the dysregulation of behavior that goes with trauma. They have to be healing oriented. They have to be able to figure out what's going on with kids and then connect them to resources, settings, and most key, close relationships are the most effective antidote to trauma. So just to kind of give that a little bit of flavor, cortisol is the hormone that's produced when we are under stress, when we are anxious. It does, as I said, impede the way the brain functions. It produces the adrenaline and cortisol and fight or flight syndrome that can often cause kids to be very quick to flash, to get upset, to get angry, to shut down. Oxytocin is the healing hormone, if you will, that comes about from physical and virtual hugging, that is to say, that sense of safety. And I just want to give you a little look at the power of these relationships in schools.
You had so much to offer yesterday. You okay?
I'm tired.
So what's going on?
Strong relationships are central to the learning process. What the science of learning and development tells us is that we need to create learning environments which allow for strong long-term relationships for children to become attached to school and to the adults and other children in it.
When children have experiences of closeness and consistency and trust, oxytocin is released. Oxytocin has many, many positive effects on the development of the brain. So when we think about a relationship, we're not just talking about being nice to a child. We're talking about a child having an experience of attunement and trust strong enough to release the hormone oxytocin.
Good morning, Ariella. How you doing today?
The purpose of the morning greeting is to connect with them and to just make sure that I'm seeing them as humans. Like, I'm making that relationship with them, making that bond.
I prioritize relationship building because getting to know them is the best part of the job.
When I come in the morning, we usually talk about things that are happening in our community.
We're trying to build caring and respect.
The teacher is trying to understand who I am and my values as a person.
When I have a free 45 minutes or an hour, I think to myself, I could sit down and catch up on grading, or I could go and make connections, whether it's a smile or a joke or a reminder. It validates their presence in the building.
Rock it out in the art room. It starts from so much honesty and transparency with kids. It's really easy to strive to be this like idealized, always ready to go elementary school teacher, and that's not real and that's not human.
When people start talking about other things while I'm still giving directions, it feels frustrating for me and I have to take a breath.
My students connect most with me when they see that I also struggle and I also have challenges. It takes a lot of vulnerability on my part.
Total familiarity. When that student knows that you care about them, when they know that you're a human, let's think about that. Their academic performance in your class is going to be better.
If I'm comfortable around them, then I'm more confident around them, and it's easier to ask questions and things like that.
So when you're looking at this graph, what is it that you think happened?
Some teachers I don't always get along with the best, so then sometimes I'm like, I can't do it, so I'm just not gonna do it. But when I like the teacher, I want to do their work. I'll be like, I can learn this.
You all have done outstanding work.
Emotion and learning are completely connected. If you're in a positive emotional space, if you feel good about yourself, your teacher, that actually opens up the opportunity for more learning.
Good to see you.
So as we look at what the science of learning and development is telling us, many of the assumptions that undergirded the creation of the schools that most countries created in the 20th century have proved incorrect. We used to think that, genes determine our intelligence and who we become. And, when we come into the world, we have some genetic makeup that then allows people to know our potential in advance. And we can then put kids on a tracking system based on that genetic makeup, that there's a standardized approach that the factory model took up. That's the best way to educate kids, sort of teach to the average in the middle of the class and do the same things for everybody. That average stands for the individual, that you could kind of teach to the average and get to most individuals that way. And that talent is scarce. Therefore, we have to identify a small number of kids and put them into a separate kind of curriculum or context in which their talent could be developed, and then everyone else would get something else. And what we've learned is that, in fact, genes only predict a very tiny amount of who we become. Only 10% of our genetic makeup is ever expressed. And what is expressed depends on the context we're in. That's the primary driver. It's what experiences we have. Potential is actually visible in environments that are designed to reveal it. Agency, engagement, and personalized connections stimulate deep learning. That we need to be sure that we're able to actively engage students. Almost nobody is average, and in fact, all brains are different. So average rarely represents the individual, and there is a lot of talent if we allow for potential to be supported, nurtured, and developed in environments, and it's not on a bell curve. So what kind of schools are needed now that we know so much more about learning? They'll look much less like this and much more like this. That is collaborative, inquiry-oriented group work supported by the teacher who is the guide on the side to enable kids to make progress in their inquiries. We developed something at LPI with colleagues from Turnaround for Children and other organizations to sort of synthesize this for schools into a set of design principles that could guide an equitable whole child design. And there are 5 elements to this wheel, if you will, that is represented there. And if you go to that link, you can find not only the discussion of the science and the implications for schools and the practices, but also examples from real schools, videotapes, and other resources for this kind of work to develop positive developmental relationships, the environments that are filled with safety and belonging, the way in which we structure rich learning experiences that develop deeper knowledge for the kind of demands of the 21st century, the development of skills, habits, and mindsets, social and emotional and cognitive, that support learning, and the integrated support systems that are needed to ensure that barriers to learning are removed. And just to quickly give you a sense of these, to have supports for attachment and relationships, we need to structure the school so that it supports personalization. Small schools or small learning communities, continuous relationships that can be provided by looping, and in bigger schools at the secondary level, advisory systems where a group of students is helped by a particular adult who stays with them over multiple years, teams of teachers sharing, groups of students, longer grade spans for schools, relational trust and collaboration, time for staff planned in to be in connection and communication and partnership with families, time for staff to collaborate with one another on planning the agenda for curriculum, but also on solving problems that may be emerging for children. The environments that support trust and belonging really do need to have classroom practices that create a supportive classroom community in which kids are getting explicit instruction about how to be a member of a community, how to resolve conflicts peacefully, how to work well between and among each other, collaboratively, how to respect each other, how to create an inclusive space. And it's not just how the teacher behaves, it's how the teacher enables the children to learn to behave with one another. Culturally competent teaching practices that actually connect students to the school and the curriculum, and that come from an understanding of children's experience bases and of the community in which teachers are teaching, and the lots of ways that teachers can gain that knowledge. And then personalization practices that help teachers know their students well, the ways in which they ask them to share what they know, to make choices in the curriculum, to have one-on-one conversations while other students are doing other work, so that as teachers know how their students learn, what they care about, they can bring the curriculum to the child and bring the child to the curriculum. The kind of curriculum instruction and assessment that supports deep learning and motivation is very different from the transmission teaching that was commonplace, in schools as we inherited them. It's a kind of curriculum that builds on students' prior knowledge in very explicit ways, figures out how to create rich and relevant and engaging tasks, projects, inquiries, and puts them in the zone of proximal development for where kids are ready to stretch to the next thing. It includes inquiry instruction, but it also includes explicit instruction, direct instruction, very carefully orchestrated together in ways that reduce cognitive load. That is, rather than asking kids to memorize a whole lot of stuff, there are tools and resources that kids need to have available and be able to use for the memorization side of it, so that they can use their brains for the problem solving, the analysis, and the production of sophisticated products. It actually addresses stereotype threat by being affirming to all students, rather than allowing some to feel marginalized or stigmatized by the way in which their identities may have been threatened, stereotyped in society. It supports learning to learn, growth mindset, and it's very important that it includes feedback, reflection, and revision of work, because you develop a growth mindset by getting feedback, trying it again, seeing that you've improved, and understanding therefore that you can improve. And it incorporates authentic assessments that are really the kind that support teaching and learning, and self-assessment, peer assessment, and teacher review. Here's an example of how that kind of authentic assessment can drive greater learning.
I just realized I just need to think deeper instead of just, thinking on the surface, like go beneath the surface so I can understand it. And that was what got my score higher.
It just helps me for my next essays, be able to see where the standard is, basically, and what I should be reaching for and what I should be putting in my essay.
My motto for who I am is tell the truth, live the truth, and be the truth.
I think that anytime the kids are doing work that has a greater meaning and purpose for them, that they will do better work and they'll learn more from it. So having an audience for this kind of activity tonight, having to go really public with the thinking, pushed the kids to think in ways that they may not have thought before.
Now I'm getting 96 average and high honors.
Along the way, we've been assessing them. We've been noting down what they've been doing, and they've been really having to problem solve themselves. And so the performance is the culmination of all of those skills put together and all of the learning.
And we get to apply our knowledge a lot more than just memorizing something for a test and then forgetting it. This is something we're all going to remember for a long time.
This helps me learn and realize what I've actually learned. Other than taking a test and be like, oh, I got a letter grade, cool. But if I'm taking this, I'll be like, oh wow, I know a lot because I did this and this and this and I had no problem with it.
One of the things that happens in this kind of thing, or performance assessment in general, is you go over the things that are important to them when they need to know. Because then they'll really pay attention, right? They really pay attention when they have to do something or calculate something. They'll really listen to what you have to tell them. But until then, it's kind of meaningless.
You can visualize what's going on because you've actually worked with it before you've learned it. So without even knowing what you've done, you've set a foundation for the theoretical in reality.
So around the world, people are beginning to really think about how to make assessments more authentic, more integral to teaching and learning, not just an artificial thing that happens at the end of the year or at the end of the unit, but as something that feeds into the learning process. And then this explicit focus on social and emotional skills and mindsets includes both a curriculum that provides regular opportunities to learn and then practice these skills throughout the day. All the teachers are on the same page about what they want to teach and expect students to be able to demonstrate, and then how to teach them to do it, not assume that they'll automatically know. The response to poor behavior is not punishment, but more teaching and discipline policies that provide restorative behavior supports built on community circles and other ways for kids and teachers to come to know each other, but also including opportunities for young people to make amends if there has been a problem, and to rejoin the community rather than to be excluded from it. And that guidance also needs to help focus on perseverance, resilience, the idea that we can all grow, we can all change, and opportunities to do that. Finally, the structures that reach beyond the classroom to provide systems of academic and social support, which include, of course, the health and the mental health care and the social services that need to be readily available and connected to the school, and sometimes even at the school. These are often the case in community schools that are also connecting to projects in the community, enabling kids to take up issues in the community and study them and be engaged with it, and bringing parents and community organizations in. And finally, it's also learning supports. And one of the things that's so important right now is to understand the personalization of learning, the extension of learning that can enable so many students to exceed prior expectations. Way back in 1984, Benjamin Bloom, a famous psychologist and educationist, did a whole set of studies that found over and over again that different approaches to learning produce very different results. The traditional, sort of conventional approach, teach something, test it, give a grade, then teach the next unit, test it, and give a grade, produces that normal curve that you see at the bottom of the screen in a class of 30 students. But mastery learning, which he articulated and helped people learn to do and then studied, actually moves the whole distribution of students over a full standard deviation. That's like moving the student who was at the 50th percentile up to what would be the 67th percentile. A very big shift just by a different methodology in which you teach something, students apply it, they practice it, they produce a product of whatever it may be, an essay, a science investigation, a research paper. They get feedback using a rubric that shows the dimensions of the performance that are valued, the kinds of indications of what will allow that demonstration of knowledge to become stronger, and then they revise it until they reach a mastery level. In some schools, students do that in high school for each of their subjects and produce a portfolio of mastery learning projects that they have taken to a point where they reach a standard. And that, when that's the modality for teaching and learning, which is very much like what you would see if you were coaching an athlete or a musician, that you would not just go on to the next thing, you would apply the learning and produce something and get feedback and continue to revise. You see this big shift. And if you then do that on an individual level through a tutoring situation, where you can both get the benefit of the one-to-one relationship and you can teach to a student's specific needs, allow them to practice, get immediate feedback, revise and reiterate, the distribution of performance goes up even higher. And you get the student who might have been at the 50th percentile all the way up at the 98th percentile. That is something that we need to think about as we redesign schools, so that kids who really need moments of that very direct support, one-on-one or in very small groups, 3, 4, 5 students, get it immediately when they need it. Then you don't have this wide distribution of performance. You'll see this kind of thing in Finland, where kids get whatever special help they need when they need it. And then you have a very, very equitable distribution of achievement over time, because kids are able to engage with the material and each other in a much more equitable fashion. Now, this means rethinking the way we organize time and staff and people in schools. But as one of the parents who we spoke to for the Restarting and Reinventing Schools said, reprioritize. This is the time to see if something can be different. To reset the system, we have to take a loss. But we can recoup the loss if we actually get kids excited about education and create a more positive space for them to learn. I think all of us are motivated by the great words of John Dewey, and why we are in education to begin with is because we believe that what the best and wisest parent wants for his or her child, that must the community want for all of its children. Any other goal is narrow and unlovely, and acted upon, it destroys our democracy. By being true to the full growth of all the individuals who make it up, only then can society by any chance be true to itself. And that's why we are teachers, that's why we are in this field of education. And it is the work that together I know you are embarking upon, and I wish you well in that journey. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond addressing the how we reinvent schools to suit our current reality. I especially love the practical examples that she gave, and I'm sure that you found them to be useful as well. Just a note that Dr. Darling-Hammond was not able to be with us live today due to time differences that made it impossible for her to be here. She did, however, send her best wishes. And now that we've heard from her and we've had a chance to reflect, we will invite Mr. Kamali Mannix to lead in this discussion.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Tahira, if I'm pronouncing it properly. Yes, so as was mentioned, my name is Kamali Mannix. I am the chairman of the OECS Youth Advisory Network, and by profession, I'm also a teacher. So the interesting thing is, a lot of the things that came about in the presentation are actually very interesting because they're issues that I've actually experienced before. And I think it is extremely important that the OECS is actually taking the time to really zoom into education and really bring about a lot of the things that we might think come about. And of course, I think education is extremely important. You end up creating amazing people and meeting amazing people. Okay, so when I look at the presentation, there are a few things that stood out to me. The first thing is the presenter would have mentioned so correctly the fact that COVID-19 has caused a lot of changes in the way that we see education. It has caused us to change how we choose to bring across education. And so it has even highlighted the need for integrating technology and the whole aspect of student-teacher relationship. Because I'm now a teacher, I think because of the fact that I'm young, I can mention this, I'm 22 years of age. I've been teaching for 3 years. And as a teacher, I can say that some of my teachers, I now work with them. Some of the individuals that impacted me education-wise are still in teaching. I see on the call Mrs. Desiree Antonia, Mrs. Desiree Collins, who work in the Ministry of Education. And so I think education is something that is transformative, it is something that is constant. And one of the greatest benefits is you end up seeing the fruits of your labor directly. And so we are here discussing how can we transform education to make it even better. Because one of the key things that Dr. Darling presented was the fact that a lot of the things that we've seen as traditionally correct in education has now changed. And so just before we go into our panel discussion, I am going to allow Honorable Sean Edwards, I believe he's the Minister of Education from St. Lucia, to give his brief reaction to the presentation. And of course, I do believe that his contribution will be from a position of a policymaker, as he is. And so I will allow him to take the floor for about 3 minutes, if that would be okay with you. About 3 minutes, Minister. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kimali. Like you, I have had experience in the classroom. And I want to congratulate you for having chosen the profession of all professions, teaching. I think everything I am today as a minister is as a result of the initiation I would have had as a teacher. And I always encourage young people to venture in that direction as a first job, so to speak. Like you, I want to agree that the presentation by Dr. Linda Hammond was a very, very informative one. And what I noticed is that it was very child or student focused. Everything she said related to the child, the student. And sometimes in our quest to deliver quality education, we focus on a range of issues. Not that everything isn't important and necessary, but sometimes we do so at the expense of things that matter to the children. We do so at the expense of creating environments that are conducive for learning. And for me, the takeaway from the presentation was the extent to which focus was placed on the child who's supposed to be the recipient of whatever instruction or educational package that we are looking to impart. And also, even before we can have students absorb the lesson content, to what extent do we ensure that the child from an emotional standpoint is even ready to be in a classroom setting to receive or whatever lessons or whatever knowledge that we are looking to impart. So this isn't entirely new, but I think it came in as a very timely reminder, especially coming out of the situation that COVID has forced upon us. I know in our rush to reintegrate students, teachers are ready and willing to drop the lesson plans and to maximize every single minute available in the day. But I'm saying to teachers in St. Lucia, as I've been saying for a couple of weeks now, even before we can execute the lesson plan to ensure that the objectives outlined in the curriculum are met, let us spend some time to make our children feel comfortable again, because COVID has scarred many of our children from an emotional standpoint or a psychosocial standpoint. And it is for this reason that we must find that balance, create that nexus between the emotional well-being of our children and the content that we are looking to impact by way of lesson delivery.
Thank you, Minister, for your contributions. And I am especially happy at the fact that you mentioned that you were a teacher before you even entered into politics. And I think it is my opinion, I'm going to tell my God on this opinion, I think anybody who serves in the capacity as Minister of Education should have had classroom experience. Because unless you understand the intricacies of being in a classroom, your perspective on policy and the life of a teacher will be very strange. And I've experienced it myself from interacting with ministers. It's like, okay, I can tell you've never been in a classroom. But of course, I am happy that St. Lucia has someone who is very experienced at the helm. And so I will now open, sorry. And so now we're going to go into our full-scale discussion. So when I looked in the chat, one of the first messages that popped up to me came from one of our participants whose name is Beverly. And she said, we need to understand the psychological needs of our students and create relationships with our students, thereby providing an enabling environment for learning. And I can completely agree with you, because I think unless students in a comfortable environment, it restricts their ability to learn and to function. I am aware that there are a few other ministers of education and policy makers on the call. So would anybody like to chime in and give their opinion on this particular point? the fact that, as was mentioned, we need, as educators, we have to understand the psychological needs of students so that we can create relationships with them.
Yes, Kamala, if I should come in here again, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yes, I just wanted to make the point, just to elaborate on a point that you made just moments ago. When a child leaves home on a morning, that child must have a burning desire to want to be in school. That child wakes up in the morning and that child should be very excited about being in the company and in the presence of the teacher or teachers at a particular school. And unless this can be established, this can be created, I suspect a lot of what we're doing by way of modernizing curriculum, all of this will amount to nothing if at the end of the day, the children are not looking forward, they're not excited. And all of the emotional well-being of the child's conditioning to wanting to learn, this has to be established. We have to create an atmosphere that can allow this to flourish even before we can begin to instill thoughts of how we are going to impact the curriculum. We can have the best designed curriculum in the world. At the end of the day, the effectiveness of the curriculum will be dependent on the quality of students who pass through our school system. And the quality of students who pass through the school system would be hinged on a number of factors, and one of which, and I suspect we've been overlooking for some time, is the extent to which children are comfortable in the environment where they're supposed to be living.
I can completely agree. To the other panelists and attendees, if you wish to contribute, of course, just raise your hand so that we can see you, because of course we'd like it to be a corporate discussion where everybody can give their input. I believe this is another minister, Curtis King. I'm not sure which country you're from. So be very
St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I'm planning to take a trip there. So we'll talk after. Yes, Minister.
Yes. And I'm very much in the mold of the ministers who were teachers. In fact, I spent all of my 37 adult years in the teaching fraternity, community. With regards to the issue, I feel strongly that part of our challenge is our focus on the type of education that we want to deliver and for our students to achieve. I say this because we speak from a policy frame, from the wide policy framework of producing quality education that is lifelong and that is accessible to everyone, inclusive education, we say. Now, yes, that is the goal, the broad framework. But we have to do a lot into getting all of our stakeholders to understand this, not so much as mere words, but as practical application. And I say this because while we are focused on providing quality education, while we are focused on lifelong learning, if you like, the truth is that the students and the society, wider society, receive mixed signals. I tell you why I say this. Because we are still preoccupied at the end of the day with the quantitative result of what our students do at school. So your success as a student is not measured so much by the skills that you acquire at school, whether it be in problem solving, critical thinking, and so on. your success is measured by the number of O levels or A levels that you have. And somehow we take it to mean that reflected in your results is your ability to do certain things like the critical thinking and so on. I am saying that we need, in going forward, to start to dig deeper in terms of our approach to learning, as rightly pointed out by the Honorable Doctor. But not only that, we have to have a buy-in from the broader community, the wider community. If we don't, we are going to be expressing platitudes, basically. Not that the state and policymakers, not that they would not be engaged in doing things to enhance the education product, to enhance teaching and learning. But I'm saying, because we do not take a holistic approach, we could very well be spinning top in mud, as we say, because we are not reaching everyone. And so persons do not implement what we really want in terms of what the education that we provide ought to be.
Minister, if I may want
to have more discussion, yes,
or pull something to your attention. And so in listening to you, I'm looking at this from a teacher's perspective, and here's been one of my greatest problems. Now, when we talk about being comfortable, one of the premises of creating a positive student-teacher relationship is the ability for a student to be comfortable. But it is very difficult for a student to be comfortable if they're in an uncomfortable learning situation, and I will explain. I am of the opinion, well, at least I can speak specifically to Antigua and Barbuda, where we're trying to force square pegs into round holes, in that we have been going down this line of only looking at academics in terms of our viewpoint of what school is. So we only push the history and the mathematics and social studies and the sciences, etc., but we don't push on the equal end being a seamstress, or even learning how to fish, or carpentry, or masonry. It's often a situation where you only end up in those fields of education when you've been through the academic system and you're tossed out. Or for some reason you drop out and your mother says, oh, you need to go learn a skill or something to that extent. And so the question that I would like to ask, both to the policymakers here in the form of Minister King and Minister Edwards, and of course to the wider teachers in the audience, is it possible that part of the reason why it is difficult to create a lot of student-teacher relationships is because the students are inherently uncomfortable because they know they are trying to fit into a space that they just cannot survive? I think that is something that we can possibly look at or ask. So if anybody would like to contribute, I'd like to hear your opinions on that.
Okay. Yes, I was saying, again, I want to put it in the framework of the teacher struggling to ensure that he or she prepares the students for these very, if you like, important external exams. What I call exams that have very high levels of public interest. So the teacher looks more at achieving his or her objectives rather than the whole process of having the child learning how to learn. And these things impact relationship. I recall as a headmaster or a principal where some of the so-called miserable students or not really miserable as such, but they were yearning for attention. Perhaps they had a deficit at home. We don't know. But sometimes, and very often, because the teacher is so preoccupied and completing her task to get to her objective or goals, that space to engender the sort of relationship you like with the students is not being utilized. In fact, very often it is narrowed, and that is a challenge. That is a serious challenge. And I want to throw an issue in based on the first point I was making. And it relates also to this whole issue. Now, my son goes to a secondary school. I look at his report, and I'm saying this is not just so today. This has been the case all the time for as long as I can remember. And what do you see? You see a percentage mark for math, for English, and so on. But what does that percentage mark tells you about the child's ability? For example, I can't look at that percentage mark and say that in math, he is a good, he has good skills in measurement, or he has good skills in what is it, geometry. In other words, it's just a percentage mark. Perhaps, let us look at those two areas. Perhaps his marks was lopsided in the sense that he did really well at one particular skill as against the other. But we don't know that. And this child moves from class to class until he graduates. And he graduates with, again, basically a mark. But we don't know what that mark represents. I mean, we would come to all these discussions, but these are things that we have to look at if we are going to enhance our students' ability to learn.
Okay. So thank you for that, Minister. Your contribution was timely. And again, I saw the teacher and the principal and the headmaster in you coming out, which is very positive. And so I am going to allow Ms. Shirley Mack, who's had her hand up for a while, to contribute. And then I see Minister Janelle Powell from St. Kitts, and we will go towards wrapping up. So Shirley, if you'd like to contribute, the forum is now waiting at your behest. What's happening? Hello? Okay, for some reason I'm not hearing Shirley. And so I see Cheryl. I hope I'm pronouncing Cheryl Bishop. If you're able to, you can turn on. Is it that I'm not hearing?
Good morning.
Yes, good morning.
I've been listening for quite some time, and I must admit that quite an informative presentation. A lot, and I really do like the way in which it was presented in terms of it brought us almost to a classroom kind of setting so that we understand exactly what's going on. But I think most of it, though, I think we're quite aware of what has been said. And I don't know, I am getting a little bit in the sense that we've been talking, we know what we have to do. And I'm one who has a political will, who will take the bull by the horn and say, look, we desire that change, we need that change, we know what to do, why aren't we doing it? We've been talking for quite some time, and I'm just saying that we know we must get our children career focused, career ready, globally competitive. We understand the sense of engaging, enabling, expectations, empowerment. We also understand in terms of UNESCO's pillars of education, getting much the whole critical thing, collaboration, communication. We know all the creativity. And yet we see, in other words, I think that we continue to, as someone said earlier on, focus on the academic. And that's because somebody has to speak to CXC to change also the way in which that whole examination is being done, because teachers would forever want to finish the syllabus, want to forever stay on course, and can't seem to understand the need for us to lose those children and let the creative energies and fire be lit up and see them explore learning in a different way. We're still on, earlier, even when the presenter came on, we're still based on the instruction where we're in front of that blackboard, the whole chalk and talk, kind of setting. And it's time for us to begin to uncover hidden potentials. It's time for us to see the worth in our students. So therefore, we're talking about training for teachers to understand that whole concept, the learning domains. How do we engage our students into that environment where it is totally student-centered and where we become facilitators? And I think the presenter showed exactly that. And I think many of us who are on the platform, I think we understand by now that we need to have that student-centered approach to learning. And I'm just wondering who among us will have the political will to stand and say enough is enough. We know what to do. Let us do it and move. Let us shift the whole dynamics of learning and teaching. And I am happy that the stress was made on relationship. Because if we don't have relationship in any form at all, we're not going to make it. It is key to unlock whatever we're doing. Right? Forever we'll have there's strengths among us, the challenges that we face, there are opportunities that are ahead of us, and there are threats to what we're doing. But I believe we can do it. At this point in time, to me, change is inevitable. Change comes with risk and uncertainty, but we do have to stand now and make that shift for our children in this 21st century. If we want them to be career ready and globally competitive, then the learning environment must change and change radically and change now. And therefore the examination CXC board as well, I don't know who is engaging them, but something has to be done also with that kind of examination. And I think then much change will be realized. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And so I see that there's a lot of talk in the chat and a lot of Q&A, but we're limited on time. And so I will allow the Director General to give a brief input, then the Minister from St. Kitts, and then we will close off. So DG.
Thank you very much, Kamali. Actually, the last thing that Cheryl said is very relevant to the remarks I wanted to give. And I want to tie that to a comment that was made earlier on the chat, which we responded to. Someone was asking about the challenge of individualized instruction and how does one cater for that in a very large classroom. And with formative assessment, I think, is a critical way out. And I reference the CXC CPA examination methodology, which allows you, a teacher in a classroom, to make effective use of the students who are faster with their learning, the brighter students, to assist those who are slower. So you make use of peer assessment, peer support within the classroom. What we have found from my work at CXC was that psychometric analysis of that shows statistically that students learn better from their peers and faster than from the teacher themselves. And what happens as a result is that the brighter students are reinforcing their own knowledge, because I've always said to people, especially when you just leave secondary school, it's good to take a job as a teacher on your way to go into university, because all the knowledge you were supposed to have assimilated as a student will be reinforced if you now have to teach it to someone else. But so that certainly ties with the need for us to reassess to redesign our assessment methodology. And I think the challenge, the CPA shows that is viable and possible. The challenge then, which is a discussion we have already had with ministers of education of the OECS, is for us to push now to move away from that exam-centered thing, as Dr. Veronica Simon was pointing out in the chat. Move away from the exam-centered thing and that preoccupation with completing the syllabus, to now look at what do we do about learning. And assessment must therefore be reconfigured to support learning. The other thing relatedly, to what Minister King was talking about, the report card and the apparent lack of value of the report card. If we make that paradigm shift to formative assessment, supporting learning, and so on, we move therefore from a simple, simplistic, unidimensional report card to a report portfolio that can show not just the results from exams, but the whole engagement of students in terms of their involvement in school clubs and activity, their group work, and so on, and the use of groups within the classroom itself to help reinforce learning. So it's not as complex as we make it. All it requires is a definitive political will to make the systemic changes across the entire system. It's not just about changing the curriculum or changing the exam or changing the syllabus. All of these changes have to be part of a holistic effort with each element reinforcing the other. And it is very, very doable. It is doable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DG. The very last contribution that we are going to have is going to be from the Minister from St. Kitts, which is the Honorable General Powell, and then I will turn it back over to Tahira.
All right, good morning all. Thank you for allowing me to make a very short contribution, hopefully without repeating too much, but to lend support to the speakers before me. I share the thought that we're more concerned with preparing students to pass examinations than really to learn. Anybody can regurgitate, read a book, regurgitate, and write an exam, but have you retained anything is a question. And I believe a lot of this comes from too much of a top-down approach. Are we talk about relationships with students and children? Are we really engaging them and utilizing them as part of the discussion? We're here as policymakers having the discussions and making decisions, but to what extent are we actually engaging the students to see what works for them? I believe that the way in which students learn today is very different to even when I was in school. I think I might be one of the younger ministers here. So I was in school not too long ago. So I think the way in which children learn today with the advent of technology and tablets and smartphones is very different to the era when we had none of those. I believe that we do have to look at, and certainly in St. Kitts and Nevis, we utilize continuous assessment throughout the year, as opposed to reliance on too much reliance on an exam at the end of the year. We utilize that successfully during the last 2 years as a result of COVID. And so I think that in itself helps to take some of the pressure off of this preoccupation with examinations. The other point that I would raise is we now need to really allow students. I think you were the one who said the system is now forcing square pegs into round holes, and we need to move away from that. Certainly in St. Kitts and Nevis, in our curriculum reform, we are trying to do that. We are moving away from the streaming system. And well, Dr. Jules would have just indicated the ways in which through peer learning, more advanced students can assist the slower ones. And so I think that is really the way to go. I do believe that CXC, we're really going to have to make hard decisions in terms of how we're going to apply CXC and how we move forward with CXC, because there's a risk that there'll be some form of a rebellion, I think, in the way, if we continue in going on the road in which we are going down. But I agree in terms of we need to now look at how best do we assist children to learn within the realms that they want to learn in. And I'll give a very, very quick personal story before I leave. I am the son of a welder. I grew up with my father's welding shop attached to the house. However, when I went to high school, I was in the top stream and I was told I couldn't do metal work. I had to choose between sciences and business subjects. No, metal work was putting food on the table and the clothes on my back. This is what I was exposed to every day. This was a family business. And it was extremely difficult for me, although I was successful in eventually, pushing the buttons in order to be able to do metalwork and being in the top stream, which had never been done. But our students should not be forced to have to go through that. Because I'm in the top stream and considered the cream of the crop does not mean that I can't do more technical and vocational subjects. And so I think we really need to look at it from more of a ground up and less of a top down approach.
All right. I'd like to thank everybody for their contributions. Indeed, they were timely, they were accurate, and I can see that there's a burning desire and passion for education within the OECS. And I do hope both as a teacher, as a proud product of all public schools, and most of all as chairman of the OECS Youth Advisory Network, that a lot of the contributions of ministers aren't just contributions because, you're in front of people and you'd like to look good, but because there is a overall desire from policymakers to transform education. Because I can tell you pretty much our young people deserve it. They deserve the best quality education that can be offered to them. And so it is my hope and my burning desire in the deepest bottom of my heart that the Declaration on Education and the action associated with it will be executed. So I will now turn back over to our moderator to hear a cut.
Wow, what a great session. Thank you so much to our moderator, Kamali Mannix, and of course to our presenter, Dr. Darling Hammond, and to all of you, our participants this morning. I'm loving the energy. I'm loving the energy and the passion in these frank discussions. And I hope that we continue this level of energy throughout the rest of the day and of course into tomorrow as well. We will be looking at your questions for response, all of the questions that you posed in the question and answer segment that we did not have a chance to get to today. And this is definitely the way that we do it. With all of the right people in the room, this is how we move towards change. Let us continue with these frank and open discussions. Now, before we move on to the next segment, we did launch a poll just a short while ago. So we're going to share the results for that poll on the screen with you now, so that you can have an idea what the results were. Okay. And now we will move on. One of the main objectives of this two-day forum is the development of an official OECS declaration on education that outlines informed and strategic interventions that outlines.
The history of OECS countries is punctuated by joint programs and collaborative efforts in education. Among the highlights of education development in previous years would be the Foundation for the Future, the first long-term education reform strategy. Another would be the Pillars for Partnership and Progress, which followed. These education strategies and the present one, the OECS Education Sector Strategy, serve as major milestones in the region and represent some 30 years of joint visioning on education with highly consultative processes. In many ways, they have helped shape OECS education today. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, it became clear that the best of OECS education was not good enough. OECS member states sprang into action, led by the Education Development Management Unit, designing the OECS COVID-19 Response and Recovery Strategy. The strategy presents 4 focus areas. One example is Focus Area 2, Transition to a Distributed Learning System. That transition requires 4 elements: teacher training, internet connectivity, instructional content development, and technological devices. The OECS is presently developing and implementing a new pedagogical program with the Eastern Caribbean Joint Board of Teacher Education to better prepare teachers for meeting new requirements today. Efforts to improve connectivity are underway through the GIGA initiative. Conceptions of connectivity for education have moved from simply school connectivity to home-based connectivity as well. The increased role of the family in children's learning requires new strategies and approaches to parent and family engagement by schools. In response to the pandemic, the OECS also developed the Instructional Content and Engagement Framework, a powerful, evidence-based approach to developing instructional content that will keep students actively learning. The OECS Declaration seeks to accumulate the learning from these previous and new developments to provide a coherent, legitimate path to a more robust system of learning. Education development partners continue to play a crucial role, providing much-needed financial and technical support to help frame new approaches to perennial educational impediments. The Declaration attempts to underscore the big ideas in OECS education to maximize learning for all. It is a statement of intent by OECS countries reflective of collective commitments to raising the bar for education. You can also consider it a roadmap to achieving the desired shifts in education. Radical questions were used for deep reflection and people engagement throughout this year.
What radical changes are required now to break down barriers to student success, especially considering learning from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic? What untapped resources can be explored to support the drive to improve learning in the OECS as a result of COVID-19 and otherwise? What do ministries of education and the EDMU need to do differently to improve regional activities intended to improve learning?
These radical questions functioned as an overarching guide to conversations throughout this year's meeting series. In June, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings engaged regional educators, reminding that the answers are usually best when they are found from within.
I love Miles Portman because he makes this statement. He says the people with the problem are the same people with the solution. Your solutions are in the OECS. That's where they are. They're not going to come from the US, they're not going to come from the UK, they're not going to come from any other place than the people that you work with day to day.
In September, discussions revolved around the new world being created before our very eyes and how education must evolve to respond. Built through extensive consultation, in-depth interviews, and a running electronic survey, the voices of the people on the ground in the countries of the OECS will reverberate through the Declaration.
Our students come from varying backgrounds and socioeconomic situations. This makes the process of digital transformation within our settings difficult because diversity also means inequities in access to technology tools and skills.
I think a barrier to educational attainment is not having the resources, whether human or material, when they are most needed.
We must educate our people so that they aspire to moving from being workers to owners, because the future does not discriminate. The future just accepts you as a representative of the past. We cannot continue to divorce the building of character from our education system.
The future of education system must be coherent, adaptive, and most of all, inclusive for all students and stakeholders.
The OECS Declaration on Education, stemming from these extensive consultations, is structured around 3 components and 9 articles. Evidence of attention to resilience and other areas of human, social, economic, and creative development exists within the articles. The aim of the Declaration is to provide a relevant framework that will serve as a mandate from the region unto itself to chart a new path for education. There is still some work to do to get the Declaration into the hands of OECS citizens. There is still further interrogation to examine matters of convergence, replication, scalability, collaboration, and resourcing. There is further work to be done to provide greater opportunities for review and consultation before ratifying the document at the level of the OECS Council of Ministers Education, and then seeking additional endorsement at the national level through relevant processes and legal structures. We consider these next steps with confidence, with zeal, and with the comfort of knowing that should the OECS continue on its present developmental path, the region has the potential to become a world leader in educational design and achieve results worthy of further investigation by the rest of the world. The OECS Declaration on Education. The journey continues.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Just a reminder, and actually just to let you know that we will be posting a link to the declaration in the chat shortly. So if you haven't had a chance already, you can peruse the document and provide us with any feedback that you'd like to share. We're off to a great start, and I hope that you found the presentations thus far to be insightful. I certainly have. And at this point, we're going to take a 10-minute break to give you a chance to stretch your legs and maybe get some refreshments. Remember that you can post any questions that you may have in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen.
We are relentless in helping every learner within the OECS succeed. We gather information to make decisions about learning. We connect educators. We share best practices. We raise millions to finance interventions in policy. We connect the region to international agencies for access to scholarships. We innovate through technology. We integrate and correlate. We focus, create access to quality early childhood development services. We help every learner succeed.
Welcome back, everyone. We hope that that short break was enough time for you to get some refreshments and that you're ready for us to move on with our program. So as we move deeper today, we invite Sarah Lee Gonzalez from the Open Development Education St. Vincent and the Grenadines to speak to the OECS vision for education.
Buiti Binafi, Sarah Lee Gonzalez Nilibe. Open Development and Education, Yurome na Nuguya. Gundatina Narihinibu. So that was a greeting in Garifuna, and now in English. Protocol being established. Good morning, everyone. I am Sarah Lee Gonzalez. I am representing Open Development and Education from St. Vincent or Yurome today. I will be presenting the first theme of the OECS Draft Declaration on Education, which is the OECS Vision of Education. This draft was developed through over 40 consultations and a widely circulated survey that solicited participation from all member states. Key stakeholders that were part of these consultations include students, youth ambassadors, parents, teachers, ministry officials, development partners, and representatives from other sectors, such as the creative and performing arts, social services and welfare, and health. There are 3 articles under the first theme, the OECS Vision of Education. Article 1, the purpose of education in the OECS. Article 2, enhancing resilience. Article 3, quality and equity. The first article, the purpose of education. The purpose of education in the OECS is to foster the development of citizens from early childhood to adulthood who are firstly empowered by a regional identity that is grounded in a nuanced understanding of the history and heritage of the region. These citizens will secondly be encouraged to develop a social consciousness that honors regional history and heritage by embodying the spirit of regional integration in all facets of life. And these citizens will thirdly be committed to move beyond philosophical stances and encouraged to act to develop and promote indigenous knowledge for the betterment of the regional community and self. The core values of empowerment through self-knowledge and commitment to regional kinship above self-interest must form the basis for educational innovation and transformation across member states. Education states should prepare all learners as citizens to lead a wider economic, social, and cultural transformation across the region. Now, this will demand an expanded notion of achievement, success, and what it means to be educated. We need to redefine, not refine, the purpose of an OECS education, and it must expand notions of what it means to be educated. Achievements outside of academics, in the arts, sports, technological innovation, and entrepreneurship should also be given equal recognition. Article 2, enhancing resilience. Environmental vulnerability. The blessings of nature's bounty, which we enjoy as the result of our geography, must be met responsibly with the grounded knowledge of our equally precarious geographic context. Instilling this understanding in all citizens must be the foundation of education and training about climate, agriculture, and food security from early childhood to adulthood. We must mitigate risks, plan for crises, and build flexibility in the system. A resilient education system is the cornerstone of a resilient society. Lessons from crises past, present, and preparation for those not yet known must inform the structure, management, and operation of education systems. Agile, flexible, and adaptable systems must be the goal. Economic vulnerability. Economic activity derived from products dependent on our geography, such as tourism and agriculture, is precarious because these sectors are affected by environmental and public health disasters very easily. Education needs to prepare citizens for building a more diversified and resilient economy to absorb such shocks from these disasters. Article 3, quality and equity. Every person has an inalienable right to a basic and secondary education. Education must provide learners with, at minimum, an acceptable quality of learning, which includes but is not limited to literacy, oral expression, numeracy, problem solving, and digital literacy skills. We must also work to eliminate discrimination. No person shall face any discrimination when it comes to their access to education or the quality of education that they receive. An active commitment must be made and demonstrated in concrete, identifiable practices to eliminate discrimination of any kind due to social origin, socioeconomic status, language ability, gender, or any other characteristic. And lastly, a quality education. All learners must be provided with a quality education that provides them with the skills and tools that are most appropriate for the full development of their abilities and that offer them the opportunity to socially and economically advance and to be full and contributing members of their local and national communities. So what say you, participants? Here we have the articles again with their sub-themes. Do the proposed articles reflect what you think is needed for the OECS vision of education? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mrs. Gonzalez, for explaining so clearly the OECS vision on education. Be sure to send us your feedback. Let us know what you think of the articles. We now have a treat in store. Please join me in welcoming Eastman Levance, economics and music teacher at the St. Joseph's Convent here in St. Lucia, to deliver an artistic interlude.
Good day, my name is Ismail Lovens, an economics and music teacher at the St. Joseph's Convent. It is important that our students are involved in the arts. The arts allow them to become more productive as they use the extra time more constructively, and it also helps them to develop their discipline. Having students involved in the arts as well also helps them in the future. These students are able to earn an extra income as well as contribute to society. Most importantly, having students involved in the arts helps to keep culture alive. Thank you.
What a beautiful rendition by Mr. Lovens, and an important message as well. Encouraging our children to take part in the arts gives them an additional skill set and helps keep our culture alive. Now, we are going to go back to our presentation that we had just before this break on the OECS vision, and we're going to invite Celeste Burton to lead the moderation in this section. Sorry, everyone, we're just having a bit of technical difficulties there. So Ms. Burton will join us in just a moment. And again, she will be moderating for the session on the OECS vision for education. What we just heard from Mrs. Sarah Lee Gonzalez outlining there all of the articles. So this will give you a chance to have discussion with us, again, as live and as active as the session that we had earlier, where you can pose your questions and we can all discuss it as a grouping, as a collective. So once again, I'm going to introduce Mrs. Celeste Burton. Sorry guys, still having a bit of technical difficulties. You can go ahead and reflect on everything that we have seen this morning thus far, all of the presentations. Again, the Q&A is there for you. All of the questions that you pose, if we're not able to get to them today, we will certainly be responding to you. We have all of your email addresses, and we will use this content to develop messaging moving forward for additional consultations with you, our education stakeholders, on the way forward. If you're not very familiar with the work of the EDMU, which is the Education Development and Management Unit here at the OECS Commission, you can visit our website, www.oecs.int, and you can look for our education unit there. All of the information that we'll be sharing here today is available there for you, and more, of course. The OECS covers a number of areas in addition to education. We have agriculture, environmental sustainability. This is an opportunity for you as well to see all of the areas that the OECS delves into in our region, trying to help our citizens, our mandate, moving forward as one community together. So we are going to check in now with Mrs. Burton to see if she's able to join us. And I believe that she is. So without further ado, Celeste Burton.
Thank you, Tahira. Good morning to all. Good morning to all our guests and all participants. I trust that so far you have been enjoying the presentations. I think they have been quite provoking of thought and interest, and we've noticed so far that there have been quite a few very passionate contributions to the discussion. So we will continue. My name is Celeste Burton, and I am the Technical Specialist in Education with the OECS Commission. We would like to continue our discussion on the 3 articles that we heard in the presentation by Sarah Lee. Thank you, Sarah Lee, for presenting on the first 3 articles of the Declaration on Education. And if I can just revise or just highlight some of the important points that came out. And remember, the declaration, the draft so far is coming out of consultations held throughout the member states with students, with parents, with teachers, and other stakeholders. So according to Article 1, the purpose of education, we note that you have said it is important for us to foster development of OECS citizens, both regionally, nationally, and focus on history and heritage. Education, innovation, and transformation also came out as a running theme, as well as the notions of achievement, the evidence of achievement, what that means, and of course, the wide economic, social, and cultural resilience. The need to redefine education, and even from our previous sessions this morning, we note that this is strongly coming out in the discussions, in the recommendations, that we need to do things differently, we need to re-engineer, we need to redefine. In the second article, Enhancing Resilience, understanding our vulnerabilities as small island states, resilient education being the cornerstone of resilient societies. Economic vulnerability also coming out, and the notion of diversifying our economies. In the third article, equity and quality of education, that basic education and secondary education considered to be the right of all our citizens, the need to eliminate discrimination, to have inclusive education for all our learners, irrespective of their social age, their backgrounds, their gender, their abilities, their race, their socioeconomic status, and so on. The need for quality education, and what does that mean? Relevance, competitiveness, maximizing potential, and the notion that every learner, irrespective of who he or she is, can succeed as a citizen of the OECS. So at this point, I will engage Sarah Lee for a few minutes, and just to ask a few questions based on her interaction with some of our contributors. Sarah Lee, I hope you can hear me. And we want to apologize for Sarah because she's not able to, because of where her location, she's not able to Zoom, and we won't be seeing her, but we will hear her certainly because of her low bandwidth. But Sarah Lee, one of the points that came out very strongly is that education needs to focus now beyond the academics and turn the lens to the arts, to sports, to innovative technologies, and to entrepreneurship. I thought that even the last performance and the notion of the importance of the arts was also emphasized by our performer and our artist. Sarah, what do you think, what struck you the most when you interviewed some of the contributors? What was so important about those notions of areas for education beyond the academics that struck you the most, that was more important for you in that engagement?
Thank you, Celeste. Good morning, everyone. Biti Binafi. Most of the responses that we received around this theme came from a question about how the OECS could stand out on the world stage. So we used, for example, the case of Jamaica. When anyone thinks of Jamaica, they think of athletics, they also think of culture and reggae. So we asked the participants, how could we redefine education in the OECS to make our sub-region a leader in the world stage? And some of the responses that we received were just along these lines. So we know that there is an emphasis on academics, and this has already been highlighted in some of the discussions that we've had today. But what about those students who perhaps are not academically inclined, right? whose talents lay in other areas, we also need to make sure that their talents are highlighted, their achievements are highlighted. So this was really the thinking behind this. Another participant said we need to redefine, not refine. So we don't want to just continue what we're currently doing. We want to make sure that we start again, that we are catering to the needs of all our students. So that's really what this theme tries to capture.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. And I'm happy that this is actually coming from our interviewees, what they have said, persons from all around the OECS region, what they would like to see. I mean, it's only fitting that we listen. And so far this morning, we have heard themes of redefining, we've heard the themes of transforming, we've heard themes of not doing what is traditional, getting out of the so-called talk and chalk of the classroom. We've also heard of new and innovative curriculum. So my next, it's not really a question, my next comment for our participants, who I'm going to come to in a little while, really for us to reflect on how will we achieve this. I think from the passionate pleas we've heard so far, we recognize the importance of it. We recognize in our 21st century, even from our esteemed guest speaker this morning, the need to move, the need to get up and do it differently. So as we reflect on all what has been said, as we reflect on the way forward, what are we going to do? How are we going to get in that place? How are we going to get to the strategies and the actions that will transform our systems, that will see education moving towards that crescendo? With these few words, I will open up the floor now. Persons will indicate their intention to make comments, to ask questions, to engage, and certainly if a question is asked, you can also make a comment and engage. Based on all what we've said so far, based on the articles that have been presented, and based on your own thoughts and reflections on the previous sessions this morning. So by indicating your intention, you can raise your hand and we'll certainly call on you. Okay, I think I see is Doris, are you indicating wanting to make a contribution? Okay, Shirley Mark, you can go ahead. Shirley Mark. Okay, Shirley is not ready. Alicia Burton. Alvicia Burton. You can go ahead and make your contribution. Your hand is up. Somehow I'm not hearing. I didn't quite hear that. Are you speaking, Alicia? Okay, we'll go on to Marisa James.
Good morning. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you loud and clear. Thank you.
Yes, I just want to say it was indeed a pleasure listening to all the presenters and being a part of this initiative. I just looked briefly at the declaration and the visions, the articles that were shared, and I noticed some of the concerns that they would have highlighted at the top, being point number 3 with the unsatisfactory levels that our secondary school students graduate with, not being able to transition properly into the workforce and into the tertiary level. And I also noticed the low achievement of males across the education system. Now, this particular issue is something that's always been very passionate about. Now, I've been in the system, I'll be going on to 21 years, and I've been noticing a trend, a very worrying trend, and I'm so happy that I'm seeing this here, where so many of our males, they come in at the KG level and they're so excited about learning, and they're happy and energetic. And then as you move up to grade 2, grade 4, you start to see them dwindle. By the time you get into Form 4 level, they're not the top performers as you would see. You would have the girls now taking the lead. When you move on to the tertiary level, some of them may go on to college, but after that, even enrollment for the university level, you see that the males in our system, in our OECS system, are not willing to go the extra mile. I'm not too sure if it's willing, but something I noticed that we do as educators is that sometimes we always say, why can't you sit and behave like the girls? And I think this is one of the reasons why our males have not been achieving the way that they should. In addition, I also believe that the system needs more male figures, more male role models. The females in the system will nurture and will guide. They need mentors. And I'm so happy that this is here. And this is what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that a collective effort be made to have more male interaction with our male students. There's some things as female educators and that we may not be able to impart to our males. I always look at the African society and how boys move from boyhood into manhood, and there was the ushering of males carrying them over the threshold. And I think we're talking about how do we go about fixing, how do we go about bringing about that change. That change in education system needs for us to refocus in ensuring that 10 years, 20 years down the line, we do not see our boys disappear from the system. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Ms. James. I think that is a very relevant contribution. We all know what we have experienced in the last couple of years with our males dropping out of school, and also the social issues that our societies face. And your contribution is so relevant to some of the issues that, almost plague our system. But we do know that a lot of this has been spoken about for many years. And we also know that a lot of recommendations have been made. Where we stand now, we recognize that also we need to do it more seriously. We need to do it more consistently in terms of addressing the issues. And the recommendations that you make are certainly worthwhile recommendations. The need for role models in the school system, because we know that our education systems are predominantly female teacher oriented. So certainly that is an issue, and we will be incorporating some of your ideas into the suggestions on how we move forward with the declaration. So thank you very much for your contribution. I think we can go on to, I think we have Shelley, is it? You can go ahead and make your contribution, Shelley Slater.
Wonderful. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good. So my question is, whilst we are looking at the holistic development of our students and our teachers, what are we putting in place to help them with their mental health? And when I say mental health, not only am I referring to the emotional side or that mental side, but also the social impact that this COVID-19 pandemic has done to us as a society, and more importantly, because of all the various health and protocols that are in place that are preventing us as a society from really socializing and being there for each other in a sort of interactive way. You know, I am of the belief that our mental health, our mental capacity is being eroded. And as such, as a Caribbean, we need to do something more to assist both our students and teachers with building their mental capacity as well as their social well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. I think to some extent, Dr. Linda alluded to that this morning when she focused on the psychosocial, emotional health of students and the acceptance of students, even a basic requirement, a basic example of the morning greeting and how important that was for students and making them feel. So certainly the pandemic has brought it to the fore. It has constantly been an issue, the mental health of all students and all stakeholders, I might add, teachers as well as students, for us to take a look at it. But I know, and we've been saying a lot of this, and we're hearing repetition of the very same things that we discussed, I think, 10, 15 years ago. And to my mind, when we talk about transformation, we're looking to do radical things. So the questions that we asked our interviewers, what can be done differently? What can we do? So as you reflect, we accept your contributions, but as you reflect, how can we change our systems? How can we do this so that we can see impact, so that we can recognize changes, so that we can be successful beyond where we are now? Let's hear from Vivian Nelson. I see your hand is up, Vivian, go ahead.
Yes, hi, my name is Vivian Nelson, certified teacher of business. Okay, I have been wanting to say this for a very long time, and many more, but I will say just this one. Facilitators need a network or a platform to interact and share information with each other, not only on subject content, instructional strategies or classroom management, etc., but to keep updated on the changes in the global environment in the area of discipline to equip learners to respond to the changes effectively and become productive citizens. That's it.
Are you done, Vivian? Oh, thank you. Thank you. You need a platform. As a teacher, you need to be able to collaborate with other professionals. That platform is available to you, and we certainly will be taking note of that suggestion. I see some recommendations, some reactions, sorry, to your contribution. Certain persons are clapping, so in agreement and in support. Thank you very much. Shirley, are you ready to go ahead with your contribution? Shirley Mark, your hand is still up. Okay, we'll move to Selma. Selma, you go right ahead. Thank you. Selma Bissett.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Thank you.
Good yes, go ahead. Everybody. This morning, I think it was Dr. Bishop who asked the question, why is it that we all know because when you listen to all the speakers, the comments, and I remember from the second speaker in the series, we seem to all know what the solutions are, and yet still we cannot move. And I think one of the reasons is because the problem seems so insurmountable to us that we believe that it is going to take such great change to revolutionize the system. Maybe I'm a bit naive, but I am of the belief that small changes all across the board can also result in revolutionary change. The problem is, and I think that's something that's cultural, we are always waiting for somebody else to solve the problem. So students believe teachers should solve the problem, teachers think principals should solve the problem, principals think their curriculum officers should solve the problem, we think parents should solve the problem, then we look to the ministers of education to solve the problem, the policy makers. But the problems that we have they will take collective effort. And I think that if each person at the individual level can make the change, because as I have in my experience as a curriculum officer, when I go around, I see all what we are asking of in the education system. It exists. I see teachers who connect well with their students and they have great relationship with their students, and the students love coming to their classrooms. I've seen teachers that do the individualized teaching and learning approach. I have seen teachers who cater to all abilities. So it is not impossible. One of the things we need to do is highlight when these things are happening, spotlight those teachers, spotlight those things that are happening, so people see that it can be turned into a reality. Because for some persons, they believe that they cannot do it, and unless they see somebody who is in the situation that they are in, somebody sometimes who's in a far worse situation that they are in, doing it, then they start to believe in themselves and realize that they too can do it. So I think we need to highlight those persons who are doing the right thing. If we speak to the students will tell us who are those persons who are doing the right thing, and we have the examples to show us. So I think we just need to realize that we have the capability, we have the knowledge. It just means every one of us at our individual level can. That is not to say that we do not need overall change and resources and laptops and all the technology in schools. I'm not saying we don't need that, but a teacher, for example, they get their new cohort of students, he or she gets a new cohort, and they do something like a learning inventory and ask the students, what do you like to do? And they use that knowledge to, to engage with their students and do things the students like. You would be surprised how, I don't think you'd be surprised because we know about these things, how such a small change can go a long way. So I want to say that we all have the answers. As was said by the speaker in the last series, we all have the answers. It just takes each and every one of us to just take the first step. And I think we will start to see the changes that we desire. Thank you.
Thank you, Selma. I think this is very, very important. I actually was going to respond by alluding to that contribution from our the part 2 of the series, where the guest speaker actually said the persons with the problems are the ones who have the solutions. If I may refer to some of the research on the education of boys. Boys, it is said that boys always tell you how they learn. They always show you how they learn. It is important just for teachers and administrators to observe, to recognize. They want to play, that's how they learn. They might be a little mischievous, that's how they learn. So I think your point is so important, Selma, because some of the responses, some of the answers, some of the solutions and the resolutions reside with us, but we have to critically look at them, to examine them, to learn the lessons, and of course, to network, like the teacher said earlier, to network and to spread, communicate, to spread the good news, to spread the good practices, the best practices. And that would be certainly an important achievement on our part and a way of beginning the journey of solving, which to some extent has already begun. So we will take one other contribution. I think Sophia's hand has been up for quite a while. Sophia, you may go ahead with your contribution. Sophia, are you still?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you for this opportunity. And I would like to say that I think perhaps our view of education may still be a bit myopic. We need to perhaps consider a paradigm shift in what really is education. And if we focus on that, we may be able to shape a broader vision of education. We have gotten to the point where we need to go beyond the one size fits all. And I know we just spoke about a focus on boys and boys education, but I think there is more value in not only looking at the gender divide, but looking at interest as well, looking at the needs of the society and how do we address these gaps. And so therefore we may begin to look at more so learning institutions that offer diversity to our students and diversity from a very early age. We are beginning to see in some cases that at the secondary level, we're beginning to think along these lines. For example, in St. Lucia, where we think of the sports academy and these institutions that offer very specialized education. But I believe that such specialization needs to also begin at the primary level, and we need to be able to cater for them. So perhaps we can look at choice of school, not just by location, but by the offering as well, and looking at this at the primary level, because we know we have a lot of children who have diverse interests. And we also need to look at what are the skills that our children need to be able to function. Right now, the existing job market that we have is not the job market that will be in existence, let's say in the next 10, 20 years. And we are seeing a lot of jobs and roles in societies that didn't exist before. And we never could even perhaps visualize or imagine that these would be really featuring now. And these are the skills that you would need, or the skill set that you would need to be able to function in such role, I would say. And so how do we prepare our students for these kinds of job markets that are opening? How do we prepare them for roles and jobs that have not even been conceptualized or visualized as yet? And how can we perhaps be more, I suppose, how do we transcend what we visualize as education as we see it now, and to perhaps be more visionary and to shape what we are offering? And so therefore, we would not be offering the standard structure in every single primary school. The curriculum will not be the same in every single primary school. And then we cater to the various needs and interests. Even subjects such as coding could be something offered at the primary level, because we need to develop these skills from a very early age. And when we look at perhaps, let's say, sports, we want to build professional athletes. I know in territories like Jamaica, where we see a lot of our Caribbean athletes are coming out of this territory, the programs are developed and planned from the very early age. You will find children who are 4 years and 5 years already being trained and managed in a way that when they get older, they have the discipline, they have the knowledge, they have the know-how to be able to be good athletes. And so when we think of us within the OECS region and even broader, we need to begin to see education in such a way that it caters to all the various intelligences and interests and capacities. And so when we talk about building a child's potential, what is the potential of that child? And are we only focusing on academic potential and academic achievement? This is a question we need to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. I think you asked the question, but in a sense, you really did answer most of it. And your contribution as the last one, unfortunately, that for this part of the day's proceedings, really brings to mind everything that we have said so far. But I want to leave us with a question of whether we are truly educating our citizenry, whether we are aware of what potential means, or whether we are selective in the potentials that we are seeking to take advantage of. We have had quite an interesting and fruitful discussion. The time is limited, and so we have to end this part of the declaration discussions on the Articles 1 to 3, but certainly, as you'll see from the program, we will continue the discussions along the lines of the subsequent articles. We want to thank you so much for your interest, for your contributions. You have been certainly a group of participants who have been listening, who are passionate about education. We would like you to continue to listen and to engage with us for the rest of the 2 days that we are here, and of course, for the rest of the time that we will be seeking your participation and seeking your advice. So with these few words, I would like to thank you again and thank Sarah for her presentation. I turn you over now to our host, Tahira. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Celeste. And as you just mentioned, we can definitely feel the passion, some excellent points raised in that session. And everyone, thank you so much for the feedback. To those of you that are contributing live, to those of you that are typing in the chat and in the Q&A box, we are receiving all of your feedback and we are loving it. The declaration was posted in the chat, and already we can see some of you have begun typing feedback for us. Please continue. And to those of you that haven't had a chance to peruse the document, we're going to post the link again to make it easier to find so that you can review it and give us your frank feedback on what you think of the content or what you think we may have missed out, what needs to also be included. The agenda for these 2 days has also been shared in the chat, so you can see what's next for today and of course what will be coming up tomorrow. And for those of you that have been contributing live in this next section, we're just asking if possible, if you can turn on your cameras, because that does make it feel more interactive. And we would love to see your faces while you're engaging with us. So just a note for the next session that we will be moving to. Now, believe it or not, we are already winding down for day 1 of this OECS Education Forum. So I'm going to invite our final presenter for today, Callista Regis of Open Development Education St. Lucia, to deliver a presentation on harmonization of education policy for sector-wide success. And to moderate this session, we invite Jermaine Anthony, Technical Specialist for the Education Development Management Unit here at the OECS Commission. Over to you.
Good morning, all. I would like to greet you in. Okay, shall I go ahead, Tahira?
Yes, please continue, Mrs. Regis.
Thank you. I was greeting you in St. Lucian Creole and English. Bonjour, mamai kawaib. Non moi c'est Callista Regis. Et puis, moi travaille avec Open Development and Education. Hodia ici un gros plaisir pour représenter cette lycée présentation ça. Good morning, everyone. My name is Callista Regis from Open Development and Education. Today, it is an honor to represent St. Lucia at the OECS's Declaration of Education. I now invite you to listen to my presentation. Good morning. Permit me to adopt the protocol that has been established. Today, for my part of the presentation, I present on the second theme entitled Harmonization of Education Policy. This theme encapsulates three key areas: digital transformation, Article 4, Article 5, data-driven curriculum and assessment reform, Article 6, expanded learning pathways. Each sub-area will be examined in more detail as the presentation proceeds. I invite you to write down your comments, questions, or concerns that you may have when we engage in the discussion later. Let's begin by examining Article 4, digital transformation. Here, there are three subcategories: 4.1, harmonization of education policy; 4.2, hybrid learning beyond the pandemic; 4.3, emphasis on improving technological infrastructure. Let's begin by looking closely at harmonization of education policy. Harmonization of education policy has long been a goal of policy harmonization more broadly in the OECS. Collaborations in the development of the OECS's primary harmonized curriculum, OECS sector strategy, and in the implementation of several initiatives with external development partners are just some steps taken towards the realization of this goal. Further harmonization regarding education legislation that makes education a right accessible to all persons from early childhood to adulthood should be considered. Harmonized education policy must also address accreditation standards, teacher training standards, teacher licensing, and equitable education funding for all levels of the education system in the member states. Point 2 looks at hybrid learning beyond the pandemic. Lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic have highlighted the need for more agile and flexible education systems. There is also a need, as previously highlighted, to improve resilience given the ever-present danger of environmental disasters and the possibility of ongoing or future health crises in the region. A hybrid education system that leverages regionally developed technological innovations meaningfully to offer multiple modalities is essential to such an endeavor. Our final point under this article examines emphasis on improving technological infrastructure. One of the most urgent challenges noted in the transition to digital learning in response to COVID-19 has been the low levels of internet connectivity offered by the existing infrastructure. An OECS approach to addressing this issue that is aligned with the CARICOM single ICT space is required. Similarly, it is also necessary to ensure that other considerations, such as provision and maintenance of relevant devices to support a hybrid learning environment, are formally outlined in an OECS EdTech policy. Our second area under consideration is Article 5, which focuses on data-driven curriculum and assessment reform. There are three subcategories: a curriculum that reflects the purpose of an OECS education, teacher training and assessment. I begin by examining the first point, a curriculum that reflects the purpose of an OECS education. The curriculum should serve as the main tool for implementation of the OECS's vision of education. Culturally appropriate learning materials must foster the development of the OECS citizen outlined in Article 1.1. An expansion of the curriculum to include skills training, particularly in areas such as entrepreneurship and technological innovation, must also be considered. Let's look at our second point, teacher training. a redefinition of teacher roles that encourages greater involvement and participation of students as equal partners in the teaching and learning exchange is critical. Teacher qualifications should be reviewed with a view to expand the initial teacher training period where necessary, with longer trainee placements and a teacher license that is renewed through the completion of continuing education requirements. Our last point under this category looks at assessment. Assessment should be more varied to reflect a move away from summative assessment approaches to more formative assessment measures across the education system. By embracing more varied assessment methods, teachers and students obtain a more accurate understanding of learners' progress and what needs to be done to improve learning. More flexible forms of assessment can contribute to the goal of increasing the adaptability and responsiveness of education systems in crisis. Our final point under consideration is Article 6, where we examine expanded learning pathways, and here we focus on two subcategories. 6.1 looks at differentiated learning. 6.2 focuses on sports, the creative and performing arts. I begin by looking at differentiated learning. A more robust approach to differentiation that centers learners' needs must inform the design of education programs and education reforms. The extent to which the system meets these needs must form the basis of periodic system evaluations. Systems should seek to explore a variety of modalities to support learners, including but not limited to radio, television, and edtech platforms. Our final point under consideration looks at sports, the creative and performing arts. The expansion of learning pathways to move beyond a sole emphasis on academics to include sports, the creative and performing arts, entrepreneurship, and technological innovation is necessary for the redefinition of the purpose of an OECS education outlined in Article 1.3. Financial and policy level support for further development of these areas as integral parts of the curriculum and assessment framework will ensure varied educational offerings that represents the interests of all education stakeholders and the promotion of local and regional heritage. Here is a summary of what we've looked at so far and points for your discussion. Article 4 focused on digital transformation. Article 5 looked at data-driven curriculum and assessment reform. Article 6 focused on expanded learning pathways. I do have a question that I'd like to pose to you before I end my presentation. Do the proposed articles reflect what you think is needed for the OECS's vision of education? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Callista, for an excellent presentation. Folks, Ms. Callista Regis is no stranger to the EDMU, nor the region. Let me just say on the lighter note, in spite of her youthful appearance, she's decades old in education in St. Lucia and in the region. She's a contemporary of mine, so I should know. And so it's obviously a pleasure having you with us. As we proceed to wrap up this very engaging forum today, I want to remind participants that this is actually the third in the series of meetings that we've had for this year. And so I want to invite you to focus the discourse over the next, well, the 2 days on what next. So we're not here to lament anymore. We are interested in what is next. So in keeping with this theme of togetherness that I think Sister mentioned earlier in the day, I want to invite the participation of all those who are watching, those who are in the session today, to contribute, to collectively interrogate and reflect on what Callista has just presented. These are Articles 4, 5, and 6 of the OECS Declaration on Education, and we invite the participants to perhaps broaden the conversation or focus it on specific interests that they have. So if you raise your hand, I could try to identify you and call you out to make a contribution or ask your question. I see Honorable Curtis King. You may go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir. Just a short input. With regards to Article 5, data-driven curriculum and assessment reform, I was thinking, Mrs. Regis, that perhaps rather than the skills training, I don't know what was intended, but I am thinking that the emphasis now should go beyond the general, the skills training, to the TVET, technical and vocational training education. Because if we are using data-driven information to help to guide us, we can see clearly that in our attempt to diversify our economies, that this is an area, technical and vocational education training is significant in helping us to do so. So I was thinking rather than the generalized STORM skills training, which we would see come true in most of the areas, I think there should be a definite focus on TVET.
Your point is well taken, Honorable Curtis King. One of the things that we focused on during the interviews, or one of the things that we heard, was that the training had to relate to whatever the needs of the economy was at the moment and what's happening in the world today. So that was the focus at the time, but I do agree with you on the TVET training. That is something I guess the OECS can consider in more detail as we go further, as we discuss this issue further and as we progress in the education reform.
Thank you for that, Calista, and thank you, Honorable Curtis King. Very salient point. I did notice we had Giannetti George hand up and Vivian Nelson. So Giannetti and Vivian, perhaps in that order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anthony, and good day, everyone. Giannetti George from St. Lucia. Thank you very much. In terms of Article 5, I am somewhat not satisfied totally with this component of data-driven curriculum and assessment. I believe it's important to also keep in mind that we need to focus on how we use data in making decisions, be it decisions about classroom instruction, school improvement plans, the use of resources. I'm not sure that this article has effectively captured the importance of or the use of data-driven curriculum and assessment reform. Also, we need to speak to what will happen to this data? How will the data be captured? What kind of data? How will the data be analyzed? So I think we are still lacking a little bit when it comes to Article 5. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Giannetti. Calista, maybe just before I respond, I want to just perhaps introduce a comment made in the chat. And if I can just keep it, yes, it says the commitment and there's so many of them. Let me just see if I can get back to it. I lost it. Right, but the comment was really about the stakeholders. So with data-driven learning, we need to ensure that all stakeholders are data literate. before we can implement that strategy effectively. Persons must be able to look at the data, understand and analyze it in order to get any value from it. So maybe you can combine a response to that with the point that Giannetti just brought across.
So I will respond by putting it into context from what we got from the interviewees or the participants. When they spoke about data-driven, they were talking about real-time data as you teach, as you are in the classroom, data to do with attendance, data to help you understand the whole child. That was the context in which they were talking about the data. So what you provided would be an additional lens for us to look at data that could contribute to a better understanding of what the child needs or what the student needs so that we can better cater for the learning of the whole child. So for example, earlier we saw from Dr. Linda Hammond, the first presenter, sorry, when she spoke about the emotional and the social. So all of this was the thinking. It was not articulated that way exactly, but it was the thinking behind what they were talking about. Because when they spoke about attendance, talking about what's happening at home, why is the child absent, all of these things. So data does not relate necessarily to what happens in the classroom alone with the teacher and the student, but the whole child. Attendance, participation in different activities. How is that child responding? So it was provided in that sense. So I just want to provide the context to make sure that during the interview, this is what the participants were communicating to us, but in different ways, but essentially this is what they were talking about.
Thank you. Vivian? I think we have a hand up from Vivian Nelson.
All right. Let us go to Article 6.1. I will give you a chance. Differentiated learning. We have spoken so many times about differentiated learning without taking into consideration differentiated assessment to prepare the learner to take his or her place in society. A student who fails is a cost to society. Thank you.
Very powerful words, very put very aptly, very briefly, and I think that was a very resounding statement. Callista, how do you respond to that?
No, I definitely agree with the last quote that she made, but I also like to put it into context. When they spoke about differentiated learning, they were also talking about assessment, particularly in the new normal that we are facing with COVID-19, having the hybrid learning. So they were talking about having assessment that will reach all students. And the acknowledgement was made that we do not currently have the infrastructure to support the kinds of assessment that we want within the OECS. So for example, students with limited access to devices, students with limited internet access and so on, these issues came up, but the desire is there to ensure that we have differentiated assessment. So for example, in the first ARP, we spoke about assessment, research-based assessment that was different. The assessment was not a long test. It was short, it was concise, and it was to the point. So we need to begin to look at research-based assessment that will inform us about what these students are learning. And because it is done in the new normal that we are facing now, we need to reconfigure and rethink assessment, in the hybrid learning environment that we are faced with. So for example, if you have to assess a student, you have to give an assessment. How would you do that over the internet? How would you use radio and television? How would you use other means to do that? So these were some of the things that came up in the discussion. So the contribution that was made is definitely in line with what the participants said.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands up at the minute. Maybe I'll just slip in a quick question for you, Callista. And that is to do with Article 5. Data-driven curriculum and assessment reform. Maybe you can speak very quickly to what might constitute that data set that is perhaps most important for helping to inform and drive the necessary reform that we're looking for.
like I said a while ago, the data that they spoke about had to do with data, not only data from assessment, but also data regarding the whole child. So data on attendance, data on everything. So they were talking about data in a more comprehensive way, rather than the way we would normally look at data to give us information about how the student is learning, because it was recognized that learning itself is not just a cognitive exercise, but you do have the other components of the child that you need to take into account when you are analyzing or assessing the child. So that was the idea that came up in our discussion. And I will ask Sarah Lee and beyond, I'll invite them to provide more feedback in case I missed something. But this is certainly the thinking that was behind the comments that the participants made.
So at the risk of sounding redundant, the point we're making here is that upon reflection, in thinking about reform, we need to think about the learner as more than just a single dimensional character that we are just feeding them with information, hoping that they pass a test. We need to contemplate the whole child in terms of their home environment, psychological health, all of those aspects, to understand how we should best reconfigure to achieve the reform we want.
And they also spoke a lot about the importance, of diagnostic assessments, different kinds of diagnostic assessment. We should be paying more attention to that, and school readiness assessments. So they spoke to the importance of these kinds of assessment to give us information about where the student is, what needs to be done, so that we can better prepare them to learn.
So
I think before you continue, I think that ties in, the idea we were talking a while ago. It was in the chat, and I can't remember if somebody brought it up. We were talking about we need to teach students how to learn, and in order to teach students how to learn, we need to know where they are. So the assessment should give us information about where they are, so that we can be more ready to teach them, or more prepared to teach them how to learn. And that idea also came up in the interviews when we engaged with the participants.
Thank you. So I was about to say that I'm hearing a rumor in the chat. I think it's coming from Mark Odion Hillocks, who's saying that essentially we're already collecting this data, but somehow it's being collected in silos, and the different agencies are perhaps not speaking to one another. How do we solve that problem?
In the interviews, we spoke about greater collaborations. And when they spoke about collaboration, they were talking about collaboration across different departments, so that we can get a more holistic idea of what's happening with a school, what's happening with certain groups of students. So like the individual said, this is Mark Odion, the data is being collected, but in a lot of ways, the sense we got from the interview is that it's being collected in isolation. But if there is greater collaboration, like we said, when we spoke about the harmonization of education policy, which was the first point, harmonization in every single department, every single stakeholder, there needs to be that kind of interaction and engagement. And this is, I guess, how we will move forward in terms of progress.
Thank you. I think we'll take maybe just two other comments. Mark, is your hand still up? I think Mark probably wants to defend himself.
Yes, my hand is up. It's not really a defense. It was just to clarify what was being said before. So, as I mentioned in the comments, yes, teachers already collect this data. But when we talk about data-driven decisions, the teacher goes in the morning, they take the register. What do they do with that information? Do the teachers actually sit down on the semester, at the end of the semester, and look and say, okay, cool, we see this student declined in their attendance in a specific week. Was this accounted for by some excuse to say they were ill during that week? What effect did it have on their performance? Do we know the background of this student specifically? Can we say the student is coming from a home where they're staying with, for example, a guardian and not necessarily their actual parents? So what we'll need, when we say data-driven decisions, we need to be looking at the child's profile. So taking all information that we have collected. So for example, you should be able to, we should look at a system where we can see Odion Hillocks from preschool to tertiary. And we can see that he went to this specific preschool and this was his academic life. So we can make some assessment about, okay, this preschool, their children generally perform well academically? What are they doing differently from the other preschools? And is this kind of collective, when we have this information, we could make better judgments about the education system. I hope that was very concise and accurate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for confirming my suspicions. Very, very good point being made here. And indeed, we have to really try to get the left hands talking to the right hand, so we, all the effort really isn't spread, but rather focus on achieving what we are trying to achieve. So in closing, Calista, I don't think we have any other hands up. I just want to see how we can maybe tie all of this together. Articles 4, 5, and 6. Differentiated learning, expanding learning pathways, these are ideals. This is what we want to be able to achieve. I get a sense from even the conversation prior where my colleague Celeste was moderating, that we have to think about the future, how we prepare young people now for 10, 15, 20 years from now. Again, it appears the best way to do so is to make decisions that are based on the actual data, existing data. I'm understanding that we're collecting this data, but not doing a good job with it, with processing it, analyzing it. In the chat, I noticed Angel Kagan has mentioned that we need to change management and communication strategies to be able to begin to solve that problem. But coming back now to Article 4 on digital transformation, my last question to you today is this: how do we move this expression of digital transformation from a catchphrase or a soundbite into meaningful and concrete actions so that we can get to that goal we're trying to reach?
You have, I would say that you have already partly answered the question, and also what Mark said, because we do have, I'll use the idea of data, because we use the data and through digital means, and I was, let me pause before I continue to compose myself, sorry. I'm trying to say that we have the data, for example, right? But we are not talking to each other, which is essentially what I was saying a while ago, harmonizing everything based on what the participants were talking about. Talk to each other. Different departments should talk to each other. A while ago, we were talking about using data. If we can have a profile of the child, like Mark was saying, for example, we need to kind of store that, and there needs to be a system in place where the data is accessible to teachers about the child, about the child's background, and so on. So we have access to data that we are not using, right? So to transform ourselves digitally, I would say that we need to begin to use data more effectively, use the digital means to use data more effectively. I think this is one of the key points that was made that underscored everything that the participants were saying. Systemic change the way we use data through digital means. And we do not have a choice but to do so, especially in light of COVID-19, especially in light of the fact that every year we are hit by hurricanes in the Caribbean, and in some instances there's no school. So how do we transform by using technology? Of course, not only upgrade, but also provide greater access, like we have already said, we've already mentioned, provide greater access, provide offline access to students who might not have internet at home. So we need to begin to think about these things, provide more devices, maybe work more collaboratively with external partners, to provide some of the support that we need. And the interviews, the participants, these were some of the things they highlighted. Greater collaboration from all the stakeholders. So to transform ourselves digitally, we need collaboration with all stakeholders, starting from the child, the parents, communities, community groups. We need business people. We need educators. So there is this need for greater collaboration. And that will only happen, again, if we have proper leadership, we have strong leadership looking specifically at these areas. So this is what the participants were saying in a nutshell.
Thank you very, very much, Calista. I think you've brought to the fore really what was a good summary of the feedback, the reactions from the stakeholders that you interviewed, that you engaged with. And so I think we are all much better for it, because within a space of about 35 minutes, we now sort of have a good sense on getting closer to a consensus on what those issues are and how to approach them. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, participants, for being really very much lively and active in this session. I now take you back to my colleague, Tahira.
Thank you so much, Jermaine, and I concur. Thank you so much to the participants for your interaction with us. This has truly been really helpful towards getting to the goal that we are all trying to get to for the future of education in the OECS. We are definitely getting into the meat of the matter, and we're able to address some of the problem areas that may have been hindering this process of harmonization of education for policy and sector-wide success. So I'm going to ask Callista Regis to remain with us, and we're going to invite Sarah Lee Gonzalez to aid us with a wrap-up and a summary of all that we have seen today in day one. We've certainly touched on a number of topics, so we invite these ladies to return and give us an overall summary.
Thank you again. So as we started the day's proceedings, we had the welcome remarks from the Director General, and we also had remarks from the Honorable Minister, who highlighted 3 themes. He talked about the need to attend to instruction, to curriculum development, as well as the development of human capacity. We then had the keynote by Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond, and she really brought our attention to the recent confluence of crises that we have been facing, not just in the Caribbean, but across the world as well. She also brought our attention to the fact that schools as they're currently designed are not for the 21st century, and there needs to be some reinvention of schooling to cater to those needs. She highlighted the ways in which evidence has challenged some 20th century assumptions about education, such as these ideas that genes determine intelligence, that potential is knowable in advance, that talent is scarce, or that a standardized factory model is the best to educate our children. We had a really lively discussion after this presentation with both ministers, who highlighted the extent, what is the extent to which emotional school readiness is accounted for in our planning for the future. We also talked a bit about what is the kind of education that we want to achieve. And I'm very happy that Dr. Bishop brought our attention again to the actions. So we are all aware of what the problems are in our systems and across the region, but what are the specific actions that need to take place? We had the presentation of the draft declaration statement, the first and second themes. Again, we were very happy to have an incredibly interactive session with participants. We're very grateful to those who reacted here, in the chat, or are continuing to make edits in the draft document. And of course, we invite you to continue to do so even after the conversation ends today and as it continues tomorrow. So some of the feedback that we've received so far: appreciation for the focus on boys that was highlighted in the document. We need to make sure we bring attention to teachers who are already doing the things that we want to implement at full scale. So small changes can also lead to revolutionary change. We also need to think about developing these more diverse programs for differentiated instruction from an early age. So we shouldn't just wait until students get to secondary when they choose their subjects to start talking about what are your interests, what would you like to do as you get older. We have also highlighted the importance of education technology and how data-driven decision-making can help to improve our education systems for all students. So the other articles in the draft declaration statement will be presented tomorrow, and we invite you again to come and give your reflections and your feedback. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sarah Lee. So I'm just going to give a brief summary of what we have discussed so far. Like you said, we started with Dr. Didicus Jules, who gave us 3 themes. He spoke about instruction, curriculum development, human capacity. One of the things that he said that really resonated with me was when he mentioned that learning is a communal responsibility. And that it brings to the fore the whole, I think, one of the central themes of what we've been talking about today, the idea of collaboration. Collaborating to make learning possible for students from different socioeconomic backgrounds. When we spoke about digital transformation a while ago, that involves collaboration to make learning possible, or to make devices accessible, to make internet accessible, to strengthen the bandwidth within the OECS, collaborations to make these things possible. So learning as a communal responsibility will take into account all of these issues. Then we heard from Honorable Sean Edward, who spoke about students as co-creators of learning, that the environment in which we are forced because of COVID-19 requires that students are repositioned as partners in the teacher-learning exchange, which we saw in one of the articles. And then we had again by Cicera Simon, when she looked at collaborative, she gave the analogy of a sheet of paper, and she looked at, if you bring them together and you try to tear them apart, once they are together, they are stronger. Again, the whole theme that has embedded what we have been discussing so far is collaboration, and that is something we need to be very intentional about. And then we saw the keynote speaker, Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond, when she spoke about restarting school, reinventing school, where we need to think about school as not only an academic exercise, but we need to look at the social and emotional needs of the child. And that ties into some of the things that we saw in the interviews, some of the comments that were made a while ago, where some of the comments made in the chat, where we need to rethink how we need to rethink or change our perceptions on students. When we see a child, is that child just just a grade? Is that child just looked at based on ability, or are we seeing the child as a whole child? Are we looking at the child's background, who the child interacts with within school, on the playground? Are we looking at that, or are we just seeing the child in the classroom context without taking into account the background and all the other experiences that will impact learning? And then we had the presentation of the various articles, where we had very, very lively discussions that forced us to reconsider what is learning. What is learning? One of the points that were made in the chat was, we have not taught children how to learn. And that's a similar point was made in the interviews, where the participants were saying, yes, the students have a lot of devices, they are very conversant in the use of technology, but we have not taught them how to use technology to learn. So that's another salient point that was made today. And in a while ago, the last set of articles, where we looked at digital transformation, we looked at changes in the curriculum, we looked at expanding the idea of learning beyond the academics, to look at sports, to look at entrepreneurship, technological development. So everything that has been discussed so far has really challenged us to rethink our approaches. And one of the key points that were made today, we saw, I can't remember who was talking about it. I think it's Cheryl Bishop, I think. And she spoke about, we already know what to do, but is there the political will to do it? Is there the will to do it? So that is another key point that we need to pay attention to. A similar idea, a similar argument was made during the interviews, where one of the participants from the British Virgin Islands, she was saying that we know what to do, but we don't have the political will to do it. So again, this is going forward. We need to look at political will to collaborate, political will to make the necessary changes, make and maintain the changes, so that we can really see true change in our education system within the OECS. Thank you so much for your participation today, and we look forward to your full participation and engagement in tomorrow's presentation of the rest of the articles. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those excellent summaries, Sarah Lee and Callista. What an amazing day one we've had. We were certainly able to cover so many topics. Thank you to our keynote speaker, Dr. Darling-Hammond, and to our presenters and moderators. We also thank you, our amazing audience, for your participation today, and we look forward to welcoming you back tomorrow as we continue the conversation with a focus on youth. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. See you then.